viewers join us. It takes a little while before they realize that we're live.
Once you do join us, let us know where you're watching from. It's always great to hear from everybody. There we go.
Don't be shy. Let us know if you're watching and let us know where you're from.
Hi, Debbie, Amanda, Jenny, Tiffany. We're so sorry, guys, that we're a little late. We had a little technical difficulties, but we got it figured out.
It happens.
We are here now, and we have some very special guests with us today. We have Hannah and Jim from Achieve Equine, and they are the makers of FLAIR Strips. So they're going to talk about everything FLAIR Strips, how to use them and the importance and how to apply.
Make sure that you put any questions that you might have in those comments, because at the end of this segment, we are going to be drawing a few winners. A few of you will receive a 6-pack of FLAIR Nasal Strips. So let us know if you have any questions. So Hannah and Jim, to kind of get us started, can you tell us a little bit about FLAIR Strips?
Yeah.
Right. We just hopefully that noise isn't too disturbing. We have a stand-in that's going to help us put a strip on. He's just a little impatient today. So anyway, hi, I'm Jim, and this is Hannah.
Hello.
So when we go back many, many years ago and came up with the idea of FLAIR Strips, I have to be honest, it was over a beer one night. And the question was asked, because it was after the human breathe right strip came out, is why nobody had made a nasal strip for horses. And what we did was we spent a little bit of time looking at the anatomy of the horse. And we saw that there was a lot of potential for using a strip on a horse, probably more so than a human being. And the reason is, if you look at the skull of a horse, and I hope you can see this, I'm going to bring it up here a little bit. This is called the nasal bone. I'm going to rotate this a little bit. And this is the top of the horse's upper jaw. In between, you see there's no bone here. If you go and feel your horse and you run your fingers down the horse's nose, you'll all of a sudden feel it collapse. And we realized this piece of collapsing tissue existed in the horse, but we couldn't find anything in the veterinary literature. So we made some up. We had an idea of how we were going to do it. We cut them with scissors. I still have some handmade ones sitting in my office. And we went to a farm called Flag Is Up Farm that's owned by Monty Roberts. And we knew we could confidentially start playing with it. And what we were finding was people were, the riders coming back on horses were saying, you know, something's different about this horse. It seems to breathe easier. It usually makes a noise. So after that, we had to do some studies. And we did a couple studies. One of them was just to find out if the strips made breathing easier. And then what was the impact of breathing easier? And so now there are 8 university studies. The first one was done at Kansas State University, but there have been studies done at University of California, Davis, at Kentucky Equine Research, and it escapes me, Michigan State University, one of the big respiratory centers. So there's quite a bit of science behind the strips now, but it all started over a beer one night and went from there.
Okay. Can you explain or talk about how the FLAIR strip works?
Sure. Maybe I showed you a little bit about where we put it over this bony piece. We've got a little video that you might put up, the one that shows the nasal animation of the nasal collapse, this tissue that collapses in. Why don't we do that first, and then we'll come back and talk through that.
Okay, we'll be right back on.
We're back. So
We're back.
hopefully you got to see that, and it's on our website too, but it's that simple. This tissue that lies over this open area here, when the horse is running fast, they're basically a big vacuum cleaner and they're sucking air in. And when they do, that tissue collapses and it pulls in there. And what we learned is it's just a rule of physics. It's called Poiseuille's law. And that law says if you have a tube and you can open it up an increment of 1, the resistance to flow goes down 16-fold. That means if you can open it up a little bit, it makes it that much easier if it's a gas or an air to flow through. In this case, we're talking about air, but it's the same principle that works in your garden hose as it works in blood vessels in your body. All we're doing is supporting that tissue so it doesn't collapse in. But when that happens, there's a pretty big impact. And the reason is this is the narrowest part of the horse's upper respiratory system. And this is one of the other things that we learned later. Research had been done years earlier and nobody paid attention to it. We were all focused on the throat because horses have throat problems. And they're real, but that's not the narrowest part of the horse's airway. It's up in the nasal passages. And if we can help support that tissue and air flows through easier, then the horse works less hard to do the same amount of work because they can bring that air in easier. And it also has an impact on reducing exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage or bleeding. There are 2 studies that show that horses use about 5 to 6% less energy when they're wearing a nasal strip. So it's just supporting that tissue, but because you support it, air comes in easier when they take a breath, and it allows a lot of interesting things that happen in the body because the lungs are such an important part of your body or the horse's body when it's performing.
And horses can't breathe through their mouths when they're exercising.
Unlike you and I.
We can open up our mouths and have that aid us in bringing in vital oxygen we need when we are exercising. But the horse can't do that when he's running. So supporting flow of air that comes in through the nose is very important.
Okay. We have quite a few questions coming in about application and how that's done. So the first question.
The first question was right here. I can't get the bottom part of my FLAIR strip to stick on my horse's nose. Am I doing something wrong?
Okay, shall we go get our model?
Yeah, but to answer your question, the first thing we want to say is you always got to make sure that you bend the strip down, and Hannah's going to show you that. The other thing is that your horse has hair on their nose because our adhesive is made to stick to hair. And as we're going to show you on the horse we're going to pull out, which is my horse, he's a little thin on hair down there. And this time of year when it gets hot and humid, it is a bit of a challenge. And we're going to show you how to dry the horse off, wipe its nose down good, and we'll use a little bit of alcohol to get the moisture off there. But we have worked on this adhesive for years with many adhesive companies, and getting something to stick to a hairy, sweaty, mobile nose like a horse is a challenge. So when you're having problems, let us know. And if you have any problems with them, we're always going to replace them because we want to make sure that you get the best benefit out of them. But if they don't stick a little bit at the bottom, that's okay. Where you want them to stick is further up. So as you can see in this triangle we're showing you, right here is the narrowest part of the upper airway. That's where what's called the nasal valve, that as long as the strip is sticking there, if it's lifted a little bit down here, we're not too concerned. All right. So I didn't know if you might want to take a couple other questions that are related to it so that when we bring Gunner out, we can answer, any other questions that are in there that fit during the application.
Patty had asked if there was any advice for applying it in humid weather. She said that even after using a microfiber towel, she can't seem to get them to stick on the sides.
And so 2 things. One, I want to make sure that you're breaking the sides, and we'll show you that when Hannah puts it on.
Flat strip, the score marks along the edges, and we're going to, as Jim's describing, break them along the sides. So
that's one thing that's important to do. The other thing is to use an alcohol rub and wipe the nose down with alcohol. What alcohol does is that it picks up the water and then it evaporates it off and keeps it drier.
So what we've been finding on those, especially on those hot, humid days, like we're based in Minnesota, we're experiencing one of those today. We're just sitting here, we're almost feeling a bit sticky, that adding in that step of a little bit of rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol as you're cleaning the nose and then letting that fully evaporate has been useful for many riders on getting those strips to stick.
Okay. We've had a few people ask about the shelf life, or where's the best place to store them.
We recommend storing your FLAIR strips at room temperature, not letting them sit on the dash of your pickup truck to get really hot in that heat. So we say to keep them in a place that is out of direct sunlight, store them at room temperature as best you can. We know oftentimes they're in our horse trailer as we're heading to the horse show. We've had FLAIR strips that are packaged and sealed for years, and we've still taken them out and they've worked great.
Yeah, we literally have some of the first FLAIR strips that were made, and we test them every once in a while. When they're 25 years old, some of them don't stick and some of them stick a little too good. But, really 5 years, they've got a long shelf life on them based on their adhesive. And while we're talking about humidity, there's that other time of the year when it's just the opposite. And again, being in Minnesota, we experience that. And the adhesive will get hard when it's cold out. When the adhesive is hard, it's not going to stick. So what you need to do is either keep it in the house or a warm vehicle until you're ready to put it on. The armpit is a great place under your jacket to keep it, but you want it to get warmed up and then it'll stick to the hair. But as far as where you keep it at home, just room temperature, but it can go down to 40 and probably up as high as 100. We just don't like, the extremes.
Also, when you put the FLAIR strip on your horse's nose, if you're able to hold your hand over the strip for 10 to 20 seconds, that can be helpful too, letting that adhesive warm up a little bit with the temperature from your hand and the horse's nose to let that adhesive flow into and adhere to the hair.
So one of the things we learned with adhesives, and we had worked with 3M, the company that makes made the adhesive for the human strip, is on horses, we want the strip to adhere to the hair. And so that adhesive is made to flow. So when you put it on, the reason we tell you to wait a few minutes before or do it before exercise, it gives that adhesive the opportunity to warm up a little bit and flow down the hair so it sticks better.
Jennifer had a question. She said, I have a horse with face paralysis on one side of his face. The nostril collapses on that side. Would this help keep that side open more? Yes.
And Jennifer, that sounded like a pretty fast yes, but the only reason I answered it that quick is because we've done it. And we've had horses that have had facial paralysis damage where that the nostril collapses, but we're more concerned again. We're playing with the tissue behind the nostril, the nasal passage, and that tissue collapses in and it will help stabilize it. Now, it's not going to do anything for the nostril itself because we don't touch the nostril. We're the nostril being, further down here, we're dealing with the nasal passage itself. But in the facial paralysis horses we've worked with, that's the part that's collapsing as well. So it does help.
Okay. Donna had asked if there are any studies showing if there is better blood oxygen level during use.
Yeah, that's a really good question and a very I'll say unanswered question, but no, and here's why. And I'm going to say this because I'm in this discussion now with various scientists around the world. We're trying to figure out if we can change this, but the horse has got what? It's got a big heart and it's got a big rib cage. And in between there sits the lungs, right? So when a horse breathes in, guess what? It can only go to its VO2 max. It can only take in so much air, and then you can't take in anymore. So if your horse is running at VO2 max, which is where we run them when we test them full out, they can't get in any more oxygen, even if we did more, because their rib cage expands. The only way we've gotten them to get in more oxygen is if we turn up an oxygen machine and increase the concentration of oxygen in the air. But the air we breathe is 20% oxygen. And so it's, when the horse is running at capacity, it's not going to give them more oxygen. But what it will do, it gives them the same amount of oxygen with less work so that they can go longer. So for each breath they take that they pull the oxygen in, they get it at a lower energy cost.
Right, and horses only use about a third of their total lung capacity due to the limitations Jim described with that chest cavity, with the rib cage and the heart.
So as we breed these horses with bigger hearts, that's cool, but we're also taking away their lung capacity because their rib cage can only hold so much.
Okay.
How long can you leave them on?
As long as you want. And it does depend on horses if they go to rubbing it, or we do know that certain supplements, sometimes horses high in fatty oil, fish oils, that hair is a little bit slippery and it's going to be harder to get the strips to stick. And then at any given time, we've had, typically I would say 4 to 6 hours, but we've had some that they'll stay on overnight. People will come up to us at a rodeo and say, it stayed on all night. Can I keep it on? Yeah, we're a believer in leave it on as long as you want because they cool out better with it too. So definitely don't take it off if it's sticking until they're cooled out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, this one's from Ken. My horse has a noise like a roar coming from its neck when moving around. Hard time getting air in. Gets worse if he runs. Will this help?
So this is something we haven't done any clinical studies on. This is something we have information from people that use these, including several throat surgeons around the country. If you think of, there's one picture I'd like to just pop up quickly. It's a photograph, it's a drawing of a side view of a horse from its nose to its chest. And I want you to look at that and it's just a long tube from the nose to the lungs. Could you pop that drawing up?
Is it that one?
The one before.
The one before that, the one before it.
Go ahead and try that one.
Is it that one?
Yes. And blow it up a little bit, but you see that blue tube, Ken, that goes from the nostril to the lungs? Just keep that in mind when I finish the explanation. So you got this long tube. So think about a garden hose. If you crimp the tube somewhere down at the bottom and it's crimped at the top, it's going to be hard to breathe, or it's going to be hard to move things through. But if you can relieve pressure anywhere along there, even though there is pressure lower somewhere else, you're just trying to help air move through a tube. You can take the drawing down now, so that as long as you can help alleviate anywhere along that tube, you should have a good result. So we have horses that have roar, they've had surgeries, they've had tiebacks, and they still make noise. And the results we get from people, and again, we haven't done any research, clinical studies on this. This is people reporting back, is that it gets rid of the noise in some of these horses that post-surgery make a noise. It reduces the noise in horses that haven't had surgery. I don't know what your horse's respiratory obstruction is, but I know it's not going to hurt. There's no way it's going to hurt anything. And the best I can say is it may help. I don't know any more about your constriction, but we do have cases where even in roars, it makes a difference just because we've opened that tube up more.
Yeah, sometimes somebody at an event will try a FLAIR strip for the first time. They'll come back to us immediately when they put their horse away, and they'll say, my horse used to sound like a fire-breathing dragon, and today I heard nothing when I rode. So we get feedback like that from riders frequently that would hear noises.
Caitlin is just hopping on with us, and she said, if a horse isn't used to them, can it make them bleed?
No, just the opposite. FLAIR strips are proven to reduce bleeding.
Okay. And then Donna had asked, how do you remove the strips without pulling the hair out?
That's a really good question. So you're going to remove a little bit, or Donna, if you're experiencing more than what normal shedding would do, and we'll put one on Gunner and we'll peel it off and we'll show you the hair. Well, he's got a white nose, so we might not be able to see it. But you are going to see a little bit of hair removal, like you're going to see in shedding. But we've, where we have people that use them every day, we've not had a problem with that. So if you're experiencing something else, please call us separately. We'll have a discussion.
Okay. Here's a question from Sky. My mare is in her 20s and gets a cough after running. Could this benefit her?
I don't know what's causing your horse to cough. The best I can say is it can't hurt. If she's like a heavy horse or a mare that has some kind of inflammatory airway disease, and that's part of it, it could help, because anytime horses have lower lung diseases, they have to work harder to bring air in. And so again, if you can relieve the pressure anywhere along the tube, that could help. But I really don't know the cause of your mare's cough to answer that fully.
Debbie would like to know if they're allowed in competition.
They're allowed in competition. The only two places they're not is at the FEI level dressage. They are allowed in training. And
certain horse.
Oh, I know,
racing.
hunter classes, but they're used in jumping, they're used in 3-day eventing, they're used in barrel racing, they're used in thoroughbred racing, standardbred racing. But those are the only two places they're not allowed in competition that we're aware of.
Yeah, everywhere from trick riding to endurance and combined driving.
Okay. Lindsay's question, any suggestions for when most of the strip is adhered, but some of the sides are not sticking?
We're going to talk about that when we put this strip on Gunner.
Okay, that's all the questions so far.
All right. So we'll put a strip on Gunner, and if we have time left, we can talk about the bleeding part if people have any bleeding issues, because that's a fairly important aspect of what the product can do as well. So I'll go get Gunner, and we'll make sure the camera lines up on him, and we'll go from there.
So while Jim is getting Gunner at Valley Vet has a variety of FLAIR strip colors available. So I thought I would go through those as we're getting our demo horse out. So we have blue, pink. So it's a little hard to see in the barn lighting here. One of our newest designs, the leather cross FLAIR strip. Brown, white, black. Try kind of some color here with the light. The USA flag strip, and then turquoise. And on this strip, I bent the edge. So I'm going to pick one of this turquoise strip and continue to show. So on the FLAIR strip, there are these score marks. So try to get the camera to focus on them. A little hard to see. And we recommend to break the strip or bend the edges along those score marks to create 90-degree angles essentially on both sides. The strip has this look. The back liner of a FLAIR strip has 3 pieces. So in a minute after we show you how we clean Gunner's nose, I'll show how we use the middle piece to create a handle to put the FLAIR strip on. So here's our horse model. We've got Gunner here today.
So before we start, just one thing on bending. The reason we do that is in manufacturing, we cut these slits in on purpose. And the reason is, if you think about it, if you just take a sticky, say you had a popsicle stick that was sticky and you had a curved piece of paper and you're trying to get it to hold up. If it's straight and it's stiff, you're going to have pulling away. But if you break that popsicle stick, it can bend. And what that does is, instead of things trying to stick here to here, they stick, it changes the forces. So it is important to allow that to happen, or to break those edges. So Gunner is here. He's a little upset. His friends are outside and he's never been on camera before. So please bear with his shyness.
his debut.
Yes. So go ahead, Hannah.
So we recommend using a clean, dry cloth to clean the hair before you apply a strip. A microfiber towel works great. So after you take your horse out, I recommend wiping that hair down good to get off any dust, any dirt, any hair that may have already been shed on the horse's nose. That's just loose hair sitting there. Gunner's pretty clean today. A lot of times we get asked, when do I put my FLAIR strip on? We recommend putting on a FLAIR strip before you start your warm-up ride, before you start exercising your horse. So while your horse is as cool as he will be.
So that was a good question. Back to the humidity question, is if your horse is sweating, you've taken him out in the sun and you've warmed him up, don't bother putting the strip on because it's just too sweaty. You want to do it before because we have much better adhesion if you stick it on first and then they sweat underneath it. And the other thing to think about is always think about a piece of Scotch tape. And if you've got a dusty countertop and you put a piece of Scotch tape on, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to stick after that. Think of their noses like this. So you get all done cleaning this horse's nose, right? And then you put him back in the stall and he sticks his nose in a hay nut and he starts bouncing the hay around. Well, guess what? You've got all these fine particles here. So you want to really think about, hair that's been shed and sitting there because all of those things can work to clog up the adhesive. All right, Gunner.
All right. So for those hot, humid days, as we talked about, you take a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, whether it be an alcohol swab wipe, or if you've got a bottle of isopropyl alcohol in your trailer, you can put a little bit on a corner of a rag and then lightly just prep the area, the strip application area with that bit of alcohol. Now, because that's a little bit wet, we'll want to let that fully evaporate for a few seconds before we go to put the strip on so we don't have that moisture working against us. You could also take your cloth again and dry or rub it on the nose. One tip we do have too is that if you take your cloth before you put the strip on and brush the hair upward from nostril to forehead, then that kind of roughs up the hair a little bit.
It helps the hair stick up so you've got more hair area to stick onto.
So for FLAIR strip position, before I apply the strip, for most horses, we say if you position the strip about 2 finger widths above the nostril to the edge of the strip, you can see that well on there. For most horses, that position works great. When you run your hand down his face, you can feel, as we showed you on the skull, right where that bone becomes unsupported, soft tissue becomes unsupported by bone. So that's where we want the top of the FLAIR strip to start. So for Gunner here, the 2 finger widths above the top of the nostril puts that strip right in an ideal position.
So what's interesting is when we started the product, we did a lot of research and we looked at Arabians, quarter horses, and thoroughbreds. And even though they all have different heads, it's really pretty standard in terms of the width across here and that length. Now, we do know there are some warm bloods, some big and even some drafts that use them that we have to do something different for. But even on a pony, it'll help too. So this area is, and we've put enough, the size of the strip provides enough variation there, but you always want to make sure, as Hannah said, we'll check it when we're done. We go back, we feel where that tissue starts to collapse. We want to make sure that top plastic strip that's within the nasal strip is over that area.
Right, so now I'm going to come back to the back liner of the strip. So there are 3 pieces. If you kind of bend your strip out, you'll see where that middle piece starts. I'm going to take this middle strip piece off and position it this way. So now I have a handle. That way I'm not having to touch the adhesive before I put the strip on Gunner's nose. Just like we talked about, if you take a piece of tape and stick it onto other surfaces before you want it to stick on something else. So 2 finger widths above the nostril. I'm going to start at the middle of the strip. Take my handle out there. So now I've got my strip secured through the middle. I'm going to then take and I'm going to start from the center and push outward on the nose. And that's it. And then now that it's on, I'm going to take and hold my hand over it for about 10 to 15 seconds. Gunner's a pretty cooperative guy here. And that's it. Now the FLAIR strip is securely adhered onto Gunner's nose. I'm going to pick up this camera and zoom out in
Another thing
here.
that I don't mind doing is putting your finger into the horse's false nostril and then squeezing down. So we're having a little bit of problem down on this lower tab. You can just do that and push it down. And then if we look where that tissue collapses, in this case, we've got the middle strip really supporting it. So for Gunner, he could probably even come down a little lower, but I wouldn't, because we're supporting where we want to be supporting. He's got a littler nose, and we don't want to touch the nostril, because when you think about how this nostril stretches, it pushes against the strip. So we don't want to touch the nostril. We want to stay above it. So for him, it works in the right place where he is now.
And you can see on Gunner's hair coat here, because we're in July in Minnesota, he's pretty shut out. His hair coat's pretty thin, and it's adhering well.
Thank you, Gunner.
To his nose.
Turning in.
So we had some questions on FLAIR strip removal. Should we go ahead and do that now?
Yep.
So when do you want to remove it?
So usually it's like a Band-Aid, and I'm going to peel the top corner here. You got that. And then we'll just peel it off. And so I don't know how much you can see there, but I guess it would have been a fairer test if we had a brown-nosed horse. But there's not a lot of hair on here. So, but you will see, I do see, I don't think you can, a little bit of hair along the edges of it. But it's still got sticks, so it's not fully loaded with hair here.
And when we look back at Gunner's nose, you can see it still has hair on the nose.
It's a good sport.
Gunner's good. All right, so now any other questions around that? One thing I did want to show you that Hannah didn't do is when you take these off, the goal is she had peeled the center strip all the way off. You don't need to do that. You can just peel it part way, and then it makes a little tab, so that when you stick it to the horse's nose, I'm going to get around here, and you tap it down, this piece just comes right up, and you don't have to fiddle with it. So either way works. We have people that like doing it the way Hannah says did it, and it's designed though that you can just pull it off. Gunner, we're going to do it to you again.
Carly asked, is it possible to use them for multiple applications if prepped and stored correctly?
That's a great question. So FLAIR strips are a single-use product. So once you have applied that strip onto your horse's nose and then taken it off, the adhesive is compromised and not going to stick in here.
I mean, I've had people try it, and on a good day it might work, but I'm not going to, we can't recommend that it'll work. You can try it. That's the best I can say. But the adhesive, because it gets clogged in that you're touching, you've got hair and you've got other things here, it's just going to make it less sticky for the next use.
Okay. Perfect. I think that was about all the questions we had about application and removal. I think maybe the only other question we haven't covered is how it can prevent bleeding.
So why don't we play that video?
Okay.
The bleeding video, and I'll put Gunner back.
All right.
Exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, or EIPH, is a condition that can occur in all horses during intensive exercise. This video will discuss the major factors causing EIPH as currently understood. While many believe that horses experiencing EIPH will have a bloody nose, studies show that only 5% of horses experiencing EIPH ever show blood at the nostrils. EIPH results when small blood vessels deep in the lungs rupture, causing red blood cells to spill into the airways during intensive exercise. So, how does the blood get into the airways with EIPH? As a horse increases the intensity of its exercise, it must bring in more oxygen for energy to power the heart and skeletal muscles to do the work. To do so, the horse breathes deeper and faster. When galloping fast, a horse moves about 6 bathtubs of air into and out of its lungs every minute. So, When running, you can think of a horse as a giant bellows pulling air into and out of its lungs with each stride, about 120 to 140 times per minute. At the same time, the horse's heart rate and blood pressure increase to pump more blood to deliver more oxygen to the working muscles. Let's look at what's happening within the lungs when all this is occurring. When we zoom in, we see a very fragile membrane called the pulmonary capillary membrane that separates the blood carrying the oxygen from the air sacs. The large increase in blood pressure from inside the blood vessels is pushing on the membrane from one side, while on the other side there is a strong suction force that is pulling on the fragile membrane as the horse is inhaling. Combined, these forces cause the membrane to rupture and red blood cells to spill out of the blood vessels into the airways, resulting in EIPH or bleeding. Two things have been shown to reduce EIPH: reducing the suction force in the air sacs and reducing the blood pressure inside the blood vessels. See the science at flairstrips.com/learn.
And you've got a pressure pushing on the blood vessel from the inside out, and you've got a pressure on the outside pulling on it. And what the FLAIR strips do is, because it's easier for them to bring air in, there's less pulling on the outside. And so what that does is it just decreases the stress on that membrane, so it has less likelihood of breaking. If it doesn't break, the blood vessels don't leak out. There is one drug, Lasix, which people may have heard of, and that works on the other side of the membrane. What Lasix does is it draws fluid out of the blood, so there's less blood in the blood vessels in the lungs, and so there's less pressure pushing out. So the strips work by themselves, or they work in combination with Lasix, but there are several university studies done that have shown a reduction in bleeding in horses, both at high speed and on lower speed treadmill.
Donna had asked, if all horses don't show blood in the nostrils, how would you know that they have EIPH?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So the way that is typically done is you'd call your veterinarian and they would pass a scope down, an endoscope, and they'd look. And if your horse has bled, you'll see blood in there. Now, oftentimes what you do see is a horse didn't perform. On the racetrack, there are horses that are running, and all of a sudden it's like they hit a wall and they don't run as hard. With barrel racers, they just don't fire. They just don't have the oomph to go. So the other thing we see is that horses will cough after exercise, or sometimes you'll hear them swallowing. And so a horse that's had a significant bleed, it's kind of, if you've ever had a bloody nose and that blood is dripping in the back of your throat, that's what they feel. So you'll see your horse swallowing as well. Now the reality is, probably the best way to do it is the way we've done in our clinical studies, where we put a tube into the lung and we go into different sections of the lungs and we actually pull samples to see how much blood is in there. And what we've learned is every horse bleeds. We can put horses on a treadmill at a trot with a very slight incline, and you're going to see more red blood cells in the lungs. So the thing that we need to do on the science side is start figuring out that membrane in there is kind of leaky to begin with, which is really important because that's probably the membrane that allows horses to be the super athletes they are, and they can move oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth much quicker than humans are. So we're going to have to accept a little bit of bleeding as normal. The concern is as it gets significant enough that it's causing tissue damage, or you're seeing some performance changes. The thing we found with FLAIR is even at low level, we just keep that to the lower level, because the other thing we've learned is every time a horse bleeds a little bit, each subsequent time they're going to bleed more, because having blood in the airways causes irritation and it causes those tissues to get more fragile and bleed again.
Right, and less than 5% of horses with EIPH show blood at the nose.
Ever show blood at the nose. So if low level work, I'm assuming not many horses show pathological bleeding unless they have very bad lungs. High level of work. Most of these horses, when we look at race horses, it's 100% of them, even though they've never shown anything in the nostril, and even though they may not be showing significant performance issues, there's still increased bleeding that's going on in the lungs.
Can you use FLAIR strips on ponies?
That's a great question. I used to have a pony who was only about 39 inches at the withers named Race Car, and we put FLAIR strips on Race Car, and it helped her out when my son was doing some game riding with her. So we do have a video on that if you'd like to roll that one.
Let me find it.
I'm Hannah from FLAIR. Sometimes we get asked if you can use a FLAIR strip on a pony. And I'm out here at my farm today because I just so happen to have a pony as well, and her name is Race Car. Let me show you how to put a FLAIR strip on a pony if you have a little pony like me. When you run your fingers along the face of your pony, you'll feel that it's fully supported by bone, and then you'll hit a point where your fingers can start to collapse inwards. This is the nasal passages of your pony's airway, and this is the narrowest part air flows through to get down into their lungs. A FLAIR strip will help to support these soft tissues right here, unsupported by bone on your pony, to help to prevent them from collapsing inwards when your horse is breathing heavy or your pony is breathing heavy and working hard. I'll show you how to put a FLAIR strip on. So in my pocket, I've got a piece of vet wrap, because the very first step is to get your pony's nose clean. The adhesive on FLAIR strips is designed to stick to hair, so I'm going to make sure I have the hair really clean on her nose before I put the strip on. I live in Minnesota, and so it's spring right now and she's shedding a lot. So as I clean her nose, I'm going to make sure I remove all the hair that I can that's been shedding to prevent that from getting in the way of the adhesive, forming a good bond. Once I feel that I've cleaned her nose well, the next thing I'm going to do is to bend the edges on my FLAIR strip to help to prevent lifting on the sides. On a FLAIR strip, there are some score marks. I'm going to bend along those score marks to form a 90-degree angle, just like so. Then as I turn the FLAIR strip over, the adhesive back liner has 3 pieces. I'm going to take the middle piece and flip it up to create a handle. That way I don't touch the adhesive before the adhesive touches my horse's nose. I'm going to remove the other parts of the liner. Now, if I was putting a FLAIR strip on my horse, normally I position the strip about 2 finger widths above the nostril. But because my pony's face is so small, I actually position the strip just right above her nostrils because the strip is going to cover all of her nasal passages. Hi, Race Car. So I'm going to line up the strip just above her nostrils a short bit. And I'm gonna peel this piece off before I push the rest of the strip down so I can get it out. Put that away. And now I'm just going to press the strip from the center pieces outwards.
Good girl, good girl.
And as there are scary things around the side of the barn, we're gonna keep pressing the FLAIR strip down. Thanks for watching how I put a FLAIR strip on my pony Race Car.
Okay, we had another question come in from Amanda. Do you find that horses with active allergies are more prone to bleeding?
Yes. I mean, anything that impacts that membrane down there, and when the horses have allergies, inflammation all along the respiratory tract. A lot of times when they pick up a cough, it's in the lungs. And so the thing about bleeding is we showed you a video of the major forces that come in there and play an impact and how FLAIR works. But the thing about bleeding is it's multifactorial. Many things play a role in them. If your horse has had lung infections, if your horse has inflammatory disease, we know altitude impacts it. If you look at our website, you can see all the different things that impact it, but having inflamed airways absolutely plays a role and can exacerbate or make bleeding more than you'd like it to be. Yeah.
Somebody had asked where you can buy these at, and you can buy them here at Valley Vet. All of the colors that Hannah showed you are available. The black and white come in 1 count. The colors come in 6 count, and the black and white do as well. And the cross and the USA flag come in 6 counts.
And all of the videos that you've seen on the live video today, you can see on our website on the FLAIR Nasal Strips product page or on our YouTube channel at Valley Vet. Okay, I think we've got some winners
now.
So before we draw, Hannah and Jim, do you have anything else to add before we draw winners?
I think we covered it, and we really appreciate your questions. They're all great questions.
And if you guys come up with any more questions, go ahead and drop them in, and we'll get with Hannah and Jim and get you some answers. So,
all right,
we are going to draw for 6 count packages. So we're going to have 6 winners, and you get a 6 count package of the color of your choice.
Okay.
So the first winner is Tiffany Christine Bunn.
Ooh, congratulations.
Winner number 2 is Jessie Budd.
We're gonna run out of confetti.
Winner number 3 is Jennifer Knight. Number 4 is Lindsay K. Dupree. Woo. And number 5 is Ken Stoughton. And number 6 is Sky Hicks. Congratulations.
Congratulations, everybody. All right, Hannah and Jim, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for answering all of our questions. We really appreciate it.
Great.
And
Thank you.
before we hop over here, I want to remind everybody that our Splash into Summer Sweepstakes is going on, and the deadline is July 30th. So get entered before it's too late.
Make sure you get entered. And Melanie and I will be back Thursday. We will be live with Easy Care, and we will be talking about the new Easy Boot remedy. So be sure to join us live then. Until then, bye everyone, and thank you.
Thank you, Hannah and Jim.